The sky above Aurelius Prime was dying. Not slowly. Not gracefully. It was being torn apart. Massive streaks of fire carved through the atmosphere as orbital defense platforms exploded one after another. Fragments of burning metal rained across the heavens. Entire sections of the night sky glowed crimson. The capital city below watched in horror. Millions of civilians filled the streets. Emergency sirens screamed. Transportation networks collapsed beneath the weight of panic. Families ran. Children cried. Military convoys pushed desperately toward defensive positions. And far above them, an armada unlike anything seen in generations advanced through the darkness. Thousands of warships. Black. Silent. Relentless. The enemy fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Not pirates. Not raiders. Not rebels. Something far worse. Every vessel bore the same symbol. A black spiral. Ancient. Feared. Almost forgotten. Inside the royal command chamber, Queen Liriana stood before a massive tactical display. Her silver eyes reflected disaster. Entire sectors of the defensive grid had vanished. 3 battle fleets no longer responded. Communications from dozens of systems had gone dark. The enemy wasn't merely attacking. They were dismantling the Empire with terrifying precision. Around her, advisors and generals argued desperately. No one had answers. No one understood how the situation had deteriorated so quickly. Report. Her voice cut through the chaos. Admiral Sarek stepped forward. His expression was grim. Our outer defensive fleets have been destroyed. Silence. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Destroyed. Not damaged. Destroyed. The Queen stared at him. All of them? Yes, Your Majesty. A military officer swallowed hard. The enemy bypassed every projected engagement model. Another officer spoke. Our predictive systems completely failed. That frightened Liriana more than the losses themselves. The Velari Empire possessed some of the most advanced strategic intelligence networks in known space. They modeled wars decades before they happened. They calculated outcomes with frightening accuracy. And yet somehow this enemy had rendered every prediction useless. A new alert flashed across the tactical display. Palace shield failure estimate. 47 minutes? The room fell silent. 47 minutes? Less than an hour before the royal palace itself became vulnerable. Less than an hour before the seat of imperial power stood exposed. Then another warning appeared. Capital evacuation routes compromised. A chill swept through the room. The attack wasn't random. The enemy wasn't simply destroying military assets. They were targeting infrastructure. Supply networks. Transportation systems. Communication relays. Someone had studied them. Carefully. Extensively. The enemy knew exactly where to strike. And that meant something terrible. Someone had helped them. Before anyone could discuss the possibility, an incoming transmission appeared. No identification. No diplomatic codes. No military designation. Only the black spiral. The symbol filled every screen. Several elderly advisors visibly paled. One dropped a data slate. The Queen noticed immediately. You recognize it? No one answered. Finally, a gray-haired historian stepped forward. His voice barely rose above a whisper. It cannot be. What cannot be? The historian looked toward the symbol. His face had lost all color. The Void Dominion. The room became still. The name carried weight. Ancient weight. The kind that survived centuries. The Queen frowned. The Void Dominion was destroyed. That's what everyone believed. The historian nodded toward the symbol. But this was their mark. The Queen crossed her arms. And who destroyed them? The old historian hesitated. Almost as if saying the answer aloud felt ridiculous. Then he finally spoke. A human. A few officers exchanged confused looks. Others laughed nervously. A human? One human? The idea sounded absurd. The historian wasn't laughing. The Dominion consumed worlds. His eyes remained fixed on the spiral. They exterminated civilizations. They conquered empires. They nearly ended organized galactic society. Silence. The Queen studied him carefully. What stopped them? The historian looked directly at her. One man. The room erupted. Impossible. No individual could alter history on that scale. Entire wars required fleets, economies, governments, alliances, not individuals. Yet the historian remained completely serious. Then the palace shook violently. An orbital strike. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Warning lights turned red. The invasion had reached the capital. And somewhere beneath the city, Princess Elira sat inside an underground academy shelter. 12 years old. Terrified. Cut off from communication. Cut off from rescue. Completely alone. The Queen didn't know it yet. But her daughter had less than a day before enemy forces reached the shelter. A final transmission arrived. The room immediately fell silent. 6 words appeared across every screen. We have returned for revenge. Then the signal vanished. No explanation. No demands. No negotiations. Only those 6 words. The Queen stared at the empty display. A terrible question formed in her mind. If the Void Dominion had truly returned, what happened to the human who defeated them? And where was he now? 48 days earlier. The royal gardens were peaceful. Crystal trees shimmered beneath golden sunlight. Artificial streams carried glowing water between flower beds. Exotic birds nested among sculpted branches. It was one of the most beautiful locations in the empire. And Nelson Ward loved every minute of it. The old human pushed a maintenance cart along a stone pathway. Gray hair. Weathered face. Simple work clothes. Nothing about him appeared remarkable. Visitors rarely noticed him. Most assumed he was another groundskeeper. Which suited Nelson perfectly. Peace was easier when people ignored you. A young gardener hurried toward him carrying a tray of seedlings. Morning, Nelson. The old human smiled. Morning. You hear about the royal inspection? Nelson nodded. The Queen is visiting. The younger gardener groaned. That means everyone's going to panic. Probably. The younger man laughed. Then looked toward Nelson. You ever wonder why you ended up here? Nelson paused. What do you mean? The younger gardener shrugged. I don't know. He gestured vaguely. You seem different. Different? Smarter than the rest of us. Nelson chuckled. That's because you're young. No. The younger man shook his head. You always know things. What things? The weather. The irrigation systems. The supply schedules. The maintenance cycles. The younger gardener frowned. You even predicted that transportation strike 3 weeks before it happened. Nelson returned to trimming a flowering vine. Experience. The answer sounded harmless. Ordinary. But there was far more truth hidden inside it than anyone realized. Experience. Nelson possessed more of it than almost anyone alive. The younger gardener eventually wandered away. Nelson continued working. Quietly. Patiently. Content. For 7 years he had lived like this. No military briefings. No casualty reports. No strategic simulations. No wars. Only flowers. And for the first time in his life, he had been happy. Unfortunately, peace never seemed interested in keeping him. Hours later, Queen Liriana arrived. Royal guards surrounded her. Political advisors followed closely behind. Media drones floated overhead. The inspection quickly became a public relations event. Everything proceeded normally. Until Liriana noticed Nelson. The old gardener knelt beside a flower bed, completely focused on his work. Everyone else had stopped. Everyone else bowed. Everyone else acknowledged her presence. Nelson simply continued planting flowers. The queen stopped. You. The gardener looked up. Your Majesty. No panic. No nervousness. No attempt to impress her. Just calm acknowledgement. The queen frowned slightly. Do you understand protocol? Yes. And yet you remain kneeling. Nelson looked toward the flower bed. I'm planting these. Several advisors exchanged nervous glances. The queen's patience thinned. You can stop. I could. Silence. Then he returned to work. The queen moved on. But she remembered him. Not because he was rude. Because he wasn't. He simply seemed completely uninterested in status. And somehow that irritated her. The memory faded quickly. Until politics intervened. A month later, the empire faced budget concerns. Military expenditures increased. Infrastructure projects expanded. Departments underwent review, including the royal gardens. Minister Talvik immediately saw an opportunity. Ambitious, manipulative, politically ruthless. Talvik recommended staffing reductions. He framed them as necessary reforms. Most officials approved without concern. When personnel files reached his desk, one name stood out immediately. Nelson Ward. Human. No noble sponsorship. No political influence. Easy target. The recommendation moved upward, eventually reaching the Queen herself. She reviewed dozens of similar requests, signed them, and moved on. Hours later, Nelson received termination notice. The younger gardener looked horrified. This has to be a mistake. Nelson examined the document. No. It says you're being dismissed. I noticed. You can't just accept that. The old human folded the paper. I can. The younger gardener stared. You worked here 7 years. Yes. Aren't you angry? Nelson considered the question. Then smiled slightly. No. The younger man shook his head. I don't understand you. Most people didn't. The next morning, Nelson packed his belongings. The process took less than 10 minutes. One bag. A few tools. A handful of personal items. That was it. 7 years reduced to a single travel pack. Before leaving, he took one final walk through the gardens. Past every pathway. Every tree. Every flower bed. As if saying goodbye. Eventually he reached the palace gates. And stopped. A black shuttle descended from the sky. Military design. Unmarked. Highly classified. The moment it landed, palace guards became alert. Armored soldiers emerged. Not ordinary troops. Elite operators. The kind reserved for missions governments never admitted existed. One of them approached Nelson. Then did something nobody expected. He saluted. Perfectly. Instantly. The others followed. Every soldier standing at attention. The palace guards exchanged confused looks. The gardener stared. Nelson sighed. You found me. The lead officer nodded. We've been searching for months, sir. Sir. The word echoed through everyone's mind. The younger gardener blinked. Confused. Palace staff exchanged nervous glances. Something wasn't right. Nelson rubbed his forehead. I told command I was retired. Respectfully, sir. The officer hesitated. Retirement appears to be over. For the first time, Nelson looked concerned. Not frightened. Concerned. A subtle difference. But an important one. What happened? The officer handed him a data slate. Nelson examined it. His expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. The officer noticed immediately. Bad? Nelson looked toward the horizon. Very far away. Toward distant stars. How many systems? The officer swallowed. 17 confirmed. The old gardener closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like a man revisiting memories he desperately hoped never to see again. Then he handed back the data slate. Thought we buried them. So did everyone else. Nearby palace guards exchanged nervous looks. Nobody understood the conversation. Nobody understood why elite soldiers treated a gardener like a superior officer. Nobody understood why these hardened veterans seemed afraid. Not of the threat. Of his reaction. Finally, one palace administrator stepped forward. Excuse me? Everyone turned. The administrator pointed toward Nelson. Who exactly is this man? The soldiers exchanged glances. Several looked uncomfortable. As if answering the question properly required explaining decades of classified history. Finally, the lead officer spoke. Very carefully. This man? He looked toward Nelson. The old gardener stood quietly beside his bag. Looking completely harmless. The officer took a slow breath. This man ended the First Galactic War. Silence. This man destroyed the Void Dominion. More silence. This man defeated the Karen hegemony. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The officer continued. The official records credit governments. He paused. They credit alliances. Another pause. They credit fleets. Then he pointed directly at Nelson Ward. But everyone who was actually there knows the truth. The officer's voice lowered. He won 3 galactic wars. The world seemed to stop. The younger gardener stared at Nelson. The palace guards stared at Nelson. The administrators stared at Nelson. Nobody could reconcile the image before them. An elderly gardener. A man who spent his mornings planting flowers. The greatest military commander in galactic history. It sounded impossible. Then the lead officer delivered one final sentence. And everything changed. The enemy is moving again. Nelson looked toward the sky. Toward the stars. Toward the approaching darkness. The peaceful life he had built was ending. Once more. Because somewhere beyond known space, something remembered humanity. And it had finally come back. The shuttle left Aurelius Prime less than an hour later. Nelson sat alone near a viewport. Stars stretched into brilliant rivers as hyperspace swallowed the vessel. The elite soldiers aboard remained unusually quiet. Not because regulations demanded silence. Because nobody knew what to say around him. Most of them had spent their entire careers hearing stories. Stories about impossible victories. Stories about extinct empires. Stories about one human commander who repeatedly defeated enemies that should have won. Most assumed the stories were exaggerated. Military myths always were. Then they met Nelson Ward. And somehow reality felt even more intimidating than the legends. The old gardener sat with folded hands, watching stars, thinking, remembering. Commander Voss finally approached. "Sir." Nelson glanced toward him. "What is it?" "We've confirmed additional attacks." "How many?" 23 systems. The cabin grew quieter. 23 systems. Entire civilizations lived inside 23 systems. Billions of lives. Nelson stared out the viewport. Expressionless. "What about fleet composition?" "Unknown." "Leadership?" "Unknown." "Objectives?" "Unknown." The old commander nodded slowly. "Then we're already losing." Nobody argued. Because everyone knew he was right. The shuttle suddenly shook. Violently. Warning lights erupted. Pilots shouted from the cockpit. Several soldiers grabbed weapons. Voss moved immediately. "What happened?" An officer rushed inside. His face had gone pale. "We have contacts." "How many?" "4." The tactical display activated. 4 black warships appeared. Fast. Aggressive. Closing rapidly. The moment Nelson saw them, something changed. Recognition. The old human leaned forward, studying the vessels. Their shape. Their movement patterns. Their formation. Then he quietly spoke. "They found us." A chill moved through the cabin. Not because of the words. Because of how he said them. Nelson Ward never sounded worried. Ever. If he sounded concerned now. The situation was serious. The shuttle accelerated. Enemy vessels followed. Missiles launched. The distance closed rapidly. Pilots cursed. Engineers scrambled. Everyone prepared for combat. Everyone except Nelson. He stood calmly. "What are you doing, sir?" "Winning." The answer wasn't arrogant. It sounded like simple fact. Nelson entered the cockpit. The captain immediately surrendered control. "Show me." The tactical display expanded. 1 transport. Terrible odds. For most commanders. Nelson studied trajectories, sensor ranges, energy signatures, relative velocities. Every detail. Every variable. Then he pointed. "There." The captain frowned. "Sir?" "Alter course 31 degrees. Toward the nebula?" "Yes." The captain hesitated. Then obeyed. The transport shifted. Enemy ships followed immediately. Exactly as Nelson expected. The old commander watched quietly. "Power down secondary systems." "What?" "Do it." The captain complied. Suddenly the shuttle appeared weaker. Damaged. Vulnerable. Easy prey. The enemy accelerated. Again. Exactly as Nelson expected. The vessel entered the nebula. Sensors degraded instantly. Visibility collapsed. Targeting systems became unreliable. Communications weakened. Chaos. Most commanders hated chaos. Nelson loved it. Because chaos punished assumptions. And assumptions killed armies. Minutes passed. The enemy ships spread apart. Searching. Hunting. trying to locate their prey. Then the first vessel exploded. No warning. No visible attack. Just sudden destruction. The bridge crew stared. Confused. A second ship vanished. Another explosion. Then a third. Panic erupted among enemy communications. The final vessel attempted retreat. Too late. A flash of light consumed it. Silence returned. 4 ships. Gone. The captain slowly turned. Sir. Nelson looked toward the stars again. Yes? What just happened? The old commander shrugged. They repeated a mistake they made 60 years ago. Nobody understood. Not yet. Hours later they arrived at a hidden military installation beyond the frontier. The station looked less like a base and more like a refugee camp. Damaged warships crowded every dock. Emergency repairs filled every corridor. Wounded personnel occupied entire medical wings. The atmosphere felt desperate. Like a war already underway. Which, Nelson realized it was. The moment he entered command headquarters, conversation stopped. Veterans stood automatically. Younger officers looked confused. Older officers looked relieved. One admiral actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because seeing Nelson meant someone else now carried responsibility. Elias. The admiral stopped himself. Sorry. Nelson smiled slightly. Still getting the names wrong, Arden? The admiral shook his head. It's been 30 years. And? The admiral laughed. The tension eased slightly. Only slightly. Then the strategic briefing began. A holographic map filled the room. Thousands of stars appeared. Red markers spread across entire sectors. Every red marker represented disaster. Destroyed fleets. Lost colonies. Occupied worlds. Nelson studied the map. Quietly. Patiently. The room watched him. Waiting. Because everyone understood something important. If Nelson Ward looked frightened, the situation was hopeless. Several minutes passed. Then he finally spoke. This isn't revenge. The room frowned. Admiral Arden crossed his arms. What do you mean? Nelson pointed toward multiple systems. These attacks make no strategic sense. Then another cluster. And neither do these. The room examined the pattern. Confusion spread. Then Nelson connected several locations. A route appeared. A path. A destination. The room became silent. Aurelius Prime. The Velari capital. The attacks weren't random. They never had been. Everything pointed toward the Queen. Toward her empire. Toward something hidden within its territory. Before discussion could continue, emergency communications activated. An incoming transmission. Priority level absolute. The image appeared. Queen Liriana. She looked exhausted. The confident ruler from the royal gardens seemed gone. Replaced by someone carrying the weight of an empire. Admiral. Your Majesty. Her eyes scanned the room. Then stopped. Directly on Nelson. For a moment she didn't recognize him. Then realization struck. The gardener. The human gardener. The employee she fired. Silence stretched between them. Finally Liriana cleared her throat. I wasn't informed you possessed military experience. Several officers nearly laughed. Military experience. That was like calling a supernova warm. Nelson remained polite. You didn't ask. The Queen looked away. Embarrassment flashed briefly across her face. Not because she fired him. Because of what she had learned afterward. Records. Archives. Military histories. Classified reports. Every source pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. The gardener she dismissed might be the most successful military commander who had ever lived. And she had fired him over budget cuts. The realization still hurt. Especially now. Because her empire was collapsing. And she needed help. Commander Ward. The title sounded strange. Even to her. Will you assist us? The room waited. The Queen waited. Entire worlds waited. Nelson studied her expression. Fear. Responsibility. Determination. Not for herself. For her people. Then he nodded. Yes. Relief washed across the room. The Queen actually closed her eyes for a moment. The first good news she'd received in weeks. Then palace alarms activated behind her. Everyone heard them. Explosions. Warning signals. Shouting. The transmission shook. The attack had reached the capital. The tactical feed changed. The city appeared. Burning. Entire districts consumed by orbital bombardment. Defense batteries exploding overhead. Enemy dropships descending through smoke-filled skies. The invasion had begun. For real. The Queen's voice remained steady. Barely. My daughter is still inside the city. Silence. Everyone immediately understood. Princess Aelira. 12 years old. Missing. Trapped. Surrounded. The Queen continued. The Academy evacuation convoy never arrived. No parent should ever have to say those words. The room grew heavy. Then Nelson stepped forward. Location? The Queen blinked. What? Your daughter. She immediately transmitted coordinates. An underground academy shelter. Deep beneath the capital. Cut off. Surrounded. Practically unreachable. Several officers reviewed the data. The conclusion was obvious. Impossible. No rescue force could reach them in time. The Queen knew it. The officers knew it. The soldiers knew it. Then Nelson examined the map. And smiled. Not happily. Not reassuringly. The smile of a predator studying prey. The room suddenly felt colder. Commander Voss noticed immediately. What is it? Nelson pointed toward infrastructure maps. Transit tunnels. Power conduits. Maintenance networks. Forgotten construction routes. Battlefield features. The old commander wasn't planning a rescue. He was planning an extermination campaign. A very small one. The Queen noticed the change in his eyes. The gardener still existed. But something else lived underneath. Something older. Something dangerous. Something responsible for winning wars entire civilizations still studied. For the first time, Liriana understood why hardened admirals became nervous around him. Why soldiers treated him like a living weapon. Why enemies feared his name. Because the moment Nelson Ward decided to fight, wars stopped being contests and started becoming calculations. The old commander turned toward Voss. Prepare a shuttle. Voss frowned. How many troops? 12. The room stared. 12? Nelson nodded. That's enough. Several officers looked horrified. The city contained tens of thousands of enemy soldiers. Entire occupation battalions. Air support. Armor. Heavy weapons. And Nelson wanted 12 soldiers. The Queen finally spoke. Commander. Yes? Do you actually believe 12 people can rescue my daughter? Nelson looked toward the burning city, then back toward her. His answer was calm, matter of fact, almost gentle. No. The Queen's face fell. Then Nelson continued. 12 people can't. A pause. The room waited. But I can. Silence. Absolute silence. Nobody knew whether the statement was confidence, arrogance, or simple truth. Then Nelson picked up a combat pack. The first combat pack he'd touched in decades. The moment his hand settled on the equipment, something shifted. The room felt it. The soldiers felt it. Even the Queen felt it. The gardener was gone. Not completely, but enough. The commander had returned. And somewhere inside the burning capital of Aurelius Prime, thousands of invading soldiers unknowingly began the worst day of their lives. Because the man they feared most in the galaxy was coming for them. And unlike the Queen, the enemy knew exactly who he was. The shuttle entered Aurelius Prime through hell. Fire streaked across the sky. Exploding defense platforms burned overhead. Fragments of warships rained through the atmosphere. Entire sections of orbit glowed red with destruction. For most pilots, it would have looked like the end of the world. For Nelson Ward, it looked familiar. Too familiar. The old commander sat quietly as the shuttle descended through clouds of smoke and debris. Commander Voss checked his rifle for the 5th time. The special operations soldiers reviewed equipment. Nobody spoke much. Not because they were afraid of combat. Because they were about to witness something few people in history had ever seen. Nelson Ward at war. The shuttle suddenly shook. A violent impact rattled the hull. Warning alarms erupted. The pilot cursed. Enemy interceptors. The tactical display lit up. For attack craft closed rapidly from above. Another 2 approached from the east. Voss checked the numbers. We're trapped. The pilot gritted his teeth. They'll intercept us before landing. Nelson studied the display. No panic. No urgency. Just observation. Then he pointed. Drop altitude. The pilot blinked. Sir? Drop altitude. The shuttle immediately plunged. Buildings rushed upward. The capital transformed into a maze of towers and crystal spires. The pilot flew dangerously low. Enemy interceptors followed. Exactly as Nelson expected. The old commander watched carefully. Calculating distances. Angles. Velocities. The city became a giant puzzle. One he had already begun solving. Left. The pilot obeyed. Now right. Another turn. Then another. The shuttle narrowly avoided a communications tower. The interceptors attempted the same maneuver. The first clipped the structure. It exploded instantly. The second collided with debris. Gone. The third overcorrected. Gone. The fourth vanished inside a residential tower. The remaining 2 attempted retreat. Too late. A chain reaction of falling wreckage destroyed both. Silence filled the cockpit. The pilot stared. Voss stared. The soldiers stared. Nelson returned to studying the city. As though nothing remarkable had happened. The shuttle landed 6 kilometers from the Academy shelter. That was as close as anyone could get. The rest would be on foot. The rear ramp lowered. The sounds of war crashed over them immediately. Gunfire. Explosions. Sirens. Screaming civilians. Burning vehicles. Collapsing buildings. The capital no longer resembled a city. It resembled a battlefield. Nelson stepped onto the ruined street. Looked around once. Then started walking. Not running. Walking. The soldiers hurried after him. One finally asked the obvious question. Sir, shouldn't we move faster? No. The soldier blinked. No? Nelson pointed toward a rooftop. A sniper occupied the position. Watching the avenue. Waiting. The soldier immediately ducked. The sniper never fired. Because Nelson had already seen him. Long before the sniper spotted them. The rescue team altered course. Avoiding the kill zone entirely. The sniper never even knew they had been there. The soldiers exchanged glances. That wasn't luck. That wasn't experience. That felt supernatural. But it wasn't. It was pattern recognition. The product of a lifetime spent surviving wars. As they moved deeper into the city, the pattern repeated. Enemy patrols appeared exactly where Nelson predicted. Ambush positions. Observation posts. Defensive choke points. Every threat revealed itself before it became dangerous. The soldiers stopped questioning him. They simply followed. 2 kilometers later, they encountered civilians. A transit station had partially collapsed. Dozens of people remained trapped inside. Families. Workers. Children. One little girl sat beside her injured father. Crying quietly. Voss checked the clock. The mission schedule was already tight. Every minute mattered. Then Nelson stopped. The commander walked directly toward the civilians. Several soldiers exchanged worried looks. The princess remained trapped. The city was collapsing. Enemy forces surrounded them. And Nelson was stopping. To help strangers. The old commander knelt beside the injured man. Examined the wound. Crushed leg. Heavy blood loss. Bad. But survivable. He immediately began treatment. The soldiers stared. One remembered reading an old military report. A sentence repeated by survivors from 3 different wars. Nelson Ward never abandoned civilians. Never. No matter the cost. 20 minutes later, evacuation routes had been organized. The wounded were stabilized. Families moved towards safer districts. The little girl hugged Nelson before leaving. The old commander looked uncomfortable. Almost embarrassed. Then she smiled. And for a moment the soldiers saw something surprising. Not a legend. Not a commander. Just a tired old man trying to protect people. The moment passed quickly. A massive explosion shook the district. Enemy dropships. Close. Very close. Nelson looked upward. Several transports descended through smoke. Hundreds of soldiers poured onto nearby rooftops. The rescue team had been discovered. Voss checked the tactical display. His face drained of color. 3 battalions. Then another alert appeared. 4. Another. 5. The soldiers exchanged grim looks. Thousands of enemy troops. Converging rapidly. The situation had become impossible. Nelson simply examined the surrounding structures. Then smiled. That smile again. The one nobody liked. The predator's smile. Good. Voss stared. Good? Nelson pointed toward the district around them. Power relays. Transit tunnels. Fuel conduits. Structural supports. A battlefield. To everyone else, it looked like ruined infrastructure. To Nelson, it looked like a weapon. Place charges here. He pointed. Then again. And again. The soldiers obeyed immediately. Not because they understood. Because they trusted him. Enemy forces advanced. Street by street. Building by building. Confident. Aggressive. Certain of victory. After all, they outnumbered the rescue team hundreds to one. What they didn't realize was that numbers only mattered when someone knew how to use them. The first explosion erupted beneath an advancing platoon. The street collapsed instantly. Dozens vanished into darkness. Enemy formations halted. Confused. Then fuel conduits detonated. Fire erupted across entire blocks. Another formation disappeared. Panic spread. Officers shouted. Units attempted regrouping. Then structural supports failed. A tower collapsed directly into their retreat route. The battlefield transformed into chaos. Perfect chaos. Nelson's favorite kind. Every enemy movement created new problems. Every solution created additional vulnerabilities. The invaders still possessed superior numbers. But Nelson no longer allowed them to use those numbers effectively. He wasn't fighting soldiers. He was fighting decisions. And he was winning. Minutes later, enemy commanders adapted. Heavy units arrived. Armored walkers. Combat drones. Mobile artillery. The situation immediately became more dangerous. One walker blasted through a building. Another destroyed defensive positions. The district shook beneath their advance. Voss checked ammunition levels. They couldn't hold much longer. Then Nelson picked up a rifle. The soldiers watched carefully. Stories often described his strategy, his planning, his battlefield awareness. Few discussed his personal combat ability. They were about to understand why. The first armored walker entered the avenue. Weapon scanning. Targeting. Searching. Nelson fired once. The shot struck a reflective panel. Ricocheted. Hit exposed circuitry. The walker exploded. The soldiers blinked. Nobody spoke. A second walker advanced. Nelson fired again. This time targeting nearby support beams. 3 stories of debris collapsed onto the machine. Destroyed. The third attempted retreat. A fuel line ruptured beneath it. Moments later it vanished inside a fireball. Every shot mattered. Every action created consequences. Nothing wasted. Nothing random. The soldiers began realizing something terrifying. Nelson wasn't reacting to the battle. He was controlling it. Every movement. Every decision. Every engagement. The battlefield belonged to him. The enemy simply hadn't realized it yet. Then intercepted communications started changing. At first they seemed routine. Casualty reports. Reinforcement requests. Tactical updates. Then one officer transmitted an image. A visual capture of Nelson. The photograph spread rapidly through enemy networks. Everything changed. Several enemy commanders stopped speaking. Others demanded confirmation. Some refused to believe it. One transmission repeated the same phrase over and over. Impossible. 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 An intelligence specialist translated rapidly. His face went pale. Voss looked toward him. What are they saying? The specialist swallowed. They know him. Silence. They're verifying identity. Another transmission arrived. Then another. Then dozens. Confusion spread through enemy frequencies. Not because of losses. Because of Nelson. The translator listened carefully. Then looked horrified. What now? The specialist's voice barely remained steady. They're asking if it's really him. Who? The specialist looked directly at Nelson. then answered. The gardener of Karen. The soldiers frowned. The translator continued. They call him that because he buried an empire. The words settled heavily across the group. The gardener of Karen. The commander who ended a war in 17 days. The strategist who dismantled a superpower believed unbeatable. The man entire fleets feared encountering. And now the enemy finally understood who stood against them. Meanwhile, deep beneath the city, Princess Elira waited inside the academy shelter. Hundreds of children remained trapped. Food supplies dwindled. Power systems failed. Hope faded. The teachers did their best. But everyone understood the truth. Rescue wasn't coming. Then distant explosions echoed through underground corridors. Closer. 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 The children looked toward the sealed entrance. Terrified. Waiting. The emergency doors suddenly trembled. Metal groaned. Dust filled the air. The children backed away. Teachers prepared for the worst. The massive doors slowly opened. A silhouette appeared. For a moment nobody moved. Then the figure stepped forward. An elderly human carrying a rifle. Covered in dust. Calm as ever. Princess Elira immediately recognized him. The gardener. Nelson smiled. Hello, Princess. Several teachers stared. Confused. This was the rescue force? One old gardener? Then explosions thundered somewhere above. Enemy forces were approaching. Fast. Very fast. Nelson turned toward the children. Can everyone walk? The teachers nodded. Mostly. Good. He checked his watch. Then looked toward the corridors. The enemy would arrive in less than 10 minutes. Perhaps less. The rescue operation wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Because somewhere above the city, an enemy warlord had finally received confirmation. The reports were accurate. The photographs were real. Nelson Ward had returned. The warlord stared at the image. For the first time in years, genuine fear touched his expression. Then he issued a new order. Forget the city. Forget the occupation. Forget every previous objective. Kill Nelson Ward. At any cost. Every available unit. Every available ship. Every available weapon. Because the warlord understood something his subordinates did not. If Nelson Ward remained alive, the invasion might already be lost. And as thousands of enemy soldiers converged on the Academy sector, the most dangerous hunt in the galaxy officially began. Unfortunately for the hunters, they had chosen the wrong prey. The galaxy had spent decades celebrating peace. Now it was preparing for extinction. News of the Nexus Gate spread quickly through military leadership. Not public channels. Not civilian networks. Only those responsible for the survival of entire civilizations. And every briefing ended the same way. Silence. Because the implications were horrifying. The invasion fleet attacking the Velari Empire wasn't the real threat. The traitors weren't the real threat. The Void Dominion wasn't even the real threat. They were merely trying to reopen a door. A door connected to something so dangerous that entire governments had buried the truth for generations. And only one living person fully understood what waited on the other side. Nelson Ward. The gardener. The commander. The survivor. The man who had spent half his life fighting monsters most civilizations never knew existed. The Emergency War Council assembled aboard the flagship Resolute. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber. Generals. Admirals. Fleet commanders. Political leaders. The most powerful people in known space. all waiting for Nelson to speak. The old human stood before a massive holographic display. No medals. No decorations. No ceremonial uniform. Just a simple military jacket. The same man who planted flowers a few weeks earlier. Yet nobody in the room saw a gardener anymore. They saw history. Nelson activated the display. Ancient star maps appeared. Many were older than entire civilizations. The room watched carefully. What you're about to see was classified for a reason. Nobody interrupted. The First Galactic War never officially happened. Confusion spread. One admiral frowned. What does that mean? It means every surviving government agreed to hide it. The display shifted. The Nexus Gate appeared. Ancient. Enormous. Impossible. A structure built by a civilization so advanced that modern science still couldn't explain its technology. 200 years ago, someone activated it. The image changed again. Darkness. Unknown space. Then thousands of hostile warships appeared. The room froze. The vessels dwarfed anything in modern fleets. Entire armadas. Moving together. Purposefully. Hungrily. The architects. No one spoke. The name itself seemed wrong. Ancient. Cold. Predatory. Nelson continued. They believed intelligent life was a contamination. The display showed burning worlds. Dead systems. Extinct civilizations. Millions of lives erased. Not conquered. Erased. They weren't interested in ruling. Another image appeared. A lifeless planet. Then another. And another. They wanted silence. The room became deathly still. Because extinction wasn't an objective. It was their philosophy. Every battle record that followed looked the same. Defeat. 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 Entire alliances collapsed. Fleet after fleet vanished. Civilizations disappeared from history. The galaxy lost repeatedly. Then one final battle appeared. The Black Reach. The largest military engagement ever recorded. Thousands of ships. Hundreds of species. The final stand of a dying galaxy. The result flashed across the display. Victory. The room stared. Impossible. Every previous battle ended in disaster. Then suddenly victory. Queen Liriana leaned forward. What changed? Admiral Arden answered before Nelson could. He did. A younger image appeared. Nelson Ward. Not old. Not retired. A commander standing at the center of the largest coalition force in history. The room stared. Arden continued. He reorganized the war in 11 days. Another record appeared. He rewrote logistics. Another. He redesigned fleet doctrine. Another. He created adaptive command systems. Another. He predicted enemy behavior with 97% accuracy. The room watched. Speechless. Arden smiled faintly. Then he won. Silence. Queen Liriana finally understood. The stories weren't exaggerated. If anything, they weren't big enough. The emergency alarms interrupted the briefing. Every display turned red. The enemy had reached the Nexus Gate. The final phase had begun. Hours later, the largest fleet assembled in generations. Warships filled entire sectors. Human vessels. Velori cruisers. Drell carriers. Karen battleships. Species that once fought bitter wars now stood together. Because extinction was excellent motivation. Across countless bridges, one image spread through military networks. An old photograph. Nelson Ward standing among exhausted soldiers after the Third Galactic War. The caption contained only 4 words. He did it before. Hope returned. Not certainty. Hope. And sometimes hope was enough. The fleet entered hyperspace. The journey toward the Nexus Gate began. 3 days later they arrived. Every officer aboard every vessel understood immediately why the enemy wanted it. The structure dwarfed imagination. A ring larger than moons. Ancient machinery stretching across space. Energy fields dancing across impossible geometries. The Nexus Gate. Sleeping for centuries. Waiting. Unfortunately, it was already waking up. Enemy fleets surrounded the structure, defending it. Power levels climbed rapidly. Something was coming. The battle began instantly. Thousands of ships collided across millions of kilometers. Missiles filled space. Energy beams crossed entire formations. Explosions illuminated darkness. Civilizations fought together. Humanity. Velari. Kurans. Species that once hated each other. Now united. Because extinction didn't care about politics. The battle raged for hours. Then disaster struck. The Nexus Gate activated. Fully. A wave of energy exploded outward. Entire fleets vanished. Sensors failed. Communications collapsed. And beyond the gate, something appeared. At first, nobody understood what they were seeing. Then realization arrived. A fleet. A gigantic fleet. Far larger than anything previously encountered. The architects had returned. The bridge of the Resolute became silent. Not because of fear. Because of scale. There were too many. Far too many. Queen Liriana looked toward Nelson. For the first time since meeting him, she saw genuine concern. Not panic. Concern. And somehow that felt worse. Then Nelson stood. Decision made. Prepare the strike team. Confusion spread. What strike team? The one going through the gate. The room erupted. Impossible. Suicidal. Madness. The architects possessed overwhelming superiority. No force could survive inside their territory. Nelson ignored every objection. Because he had already identified the solution. Deep beyond the gate existed a command nexus. Destroy it. Collapse coordination. Break the invasion. Simple. Not easy. Simple. The difference mattered. Queen Liriana stood immediately. When do we leave? Several admirals nearly fainted. The ruler of an empire joining a combat mission? Absurd. Dangerous. Unacceptable. The queen ignored them. Because she understood something now. The gardener she fired wasn't merely saving her empire. He was saving everyone. And she refused to hide while others paid the price. Nelson studied her for several seconds. Then sighed. The familiar sigh. The one that meant resistance was pointless. Fine. The queen smiled. The admirals groaned. The mission was approved. Hours later, a small assault vessel crossed through the gate. Not an army. Not a fleet. A handful of soldiers. A queen. And one retired gardener. The territory beyond known space felt wrong. Dead stars. Dead worlds. Dead civilizations. Entire regions reduced to graveyards. Evidence of wars fought long before recorded history. The architects had been busy. Very busy. Then they found the command nexus. A structure the size of a planet, protected by impossible defenses. The heart of the invasion. Destroying it appeared hopeless. Which meant Nelson immediately started planning. The infiltration lasted 18 hours. The combat lasted 6. Every meter required sacrifice. Every objective required blood. Several soldiers died. Heroes. Warriors. People who knowingly walked into hell. Yet nobody retreated. Because retreat meant extinction. Eventually the team reached the central core. The command nexus. The target. And there they met the Revenant. The monster sent to kill Nelson. Massive. Ancient. Terrifying. The creature recognized him instantly. Its eyes narrowed. Then it smiled. Commander Ward. The voice sounded like grinding metal. Nelson's expression darkened. I was hoping you were dead. The Revenant laughed. So was I. The battle that followed became legend. The creature possessed immense strength. Speed beyond reason. Experience measured in centuries. Yet Nelson survived. Not through power. Not through luck. Through adaptation. Humanity's greatest weapon. Every attack taught him something. Every mistake became information. Every second improved his odds. The Queen fought beside him. Refused to retreat. Refused to leave. Together they brought down the monster. Together they reached the command core. Together they planted the final charge. Then came the difficult part. Someone had to remain behind. The explosion would destroy everything, including whoever triggered it. Silence filled the chamber. The soldiers understood. The Queen understood. Nelson understood. Of course he volunteered. Because that was who he was. The protector. The commander. The man who spent his life paying costs others couldn't. The Queen looked at him. And finally understood why people followed him. Not because he was feared. Because he was willing to sacrifice himself first. Then one surviving engineer smiled. And revealed a remote detonator. The charge no longer required anyone to stay behind. For the first time in hours, Nelson looked genuinely surprised. The Queen laughed. A tired laugh. A relieved laugh. Then they ran. The assault vessel escaped moments before detonation. The command nexus exploded. The shockwave consumed entire sectors. The architect fleet immediately lost coordination. Formations shattered. Command networks collapsed. Across known space, Allied fleets seized the opportunity. Counterattacks erupted. Victory followed. Hours later, the war ended. The architects retreated. The invasion collapsed. The galaxy survived. Again. Weeks later, celebrations spread across countless worlds. Monuments were planned. Ceremonies organized. Military honors prepared. And at the center of it all stood Nelson Ward. Looking profoundly uncomfortable. As usual. Queen Liriana eventually found him in a familiar place. The palace gardens. Of course. Flowers. Trees. Peace. The old human knelt beside a flower bed, planting new seedlings. Exactly as he had before the war. The Queen approached quietly. You know, she said, most heroes demand statues. Nelson shrugged. Statues don't grow. She laughed. Then became serious. There is something I never properly said. Nelson looked up. The Queen smiled softly. I'm sorry. For what? For firing you. The old gardener considered the question. Then smiled. A genuine smile. Rare. warm, human. It worked out. The Queen shook her head. No. She looked around the gardens. At the flowers. At the peaceful sky. At the man who had saved the galaxy and still preferred gardening. It really didn't. Nelson laughed. Then returned to planting. The Queen watched him for several moments. Then asked the question that had haunted her since the invasion. Why become a gardener? The old commander gently pressed soil around a young flower. His answer came quietly. The answer of a man who had seen enough war for 10 lifetimes. Because after winning 3 galactic wars, he looked toward the growing plant. I wanted to help something live. The Queen didn't speak. Neither did Nelson. They simply watched the flowers. Far above them, fleets celebrated victory among the stars. Entire civilizations remembered the hero who saved them. But Nelson Ward wasn't thinking about wars, or medals, or history. He was thinking about sunlight, water, roots, life. And beneath a peaceful sky, while a grateful galaxy celebrated its survival, the greatest military commander in history returned to the only job he had ever truly loved: being a gardener. The galaxy remembered the legend. Nelson Ward remembered the flowers.